Hi, I'm Gada and I'm developing a game in Solo. Can a single person make a game that looks like it was developed by a studio? That's the dreams of a lot of solo devs, and so it's mine too. And I think it's actually possible. No, in fact, I'm sure it is. There are already examples. Just look at Manor Lords, Ghost of the Tale or Bright Memory. Still, it's an ambitious goal, and to get there you need a few tricks to maximize efficiency. Asset marketplaces are a great way to save a ton of time, and today there's plenty to choose from. Epic Fab, Unity Asset Store, Gumroad, ArtStation. Generally speaking, you always end up finding something more or less close to what you're looking for. On the other hand, quality and style are variable, and even if you easily find something close to what you're looking for, it's never exactly what you're looking for. And a game made entirely of assets from marketplace is bound to have a generic feel, and the lack of consistency between assets is often quickly felt and unpleasant. So I have to create my own assets. Except that if it takes years for a studio to make a game, how can a solo dev hope to release a game on his own without relying on asset libraries? I think we have to face the facts. It's very difficult for a single person to make a studio quality game as quickly as the said studio. We're going to have to be patient and accept that it's going to take us longer. But even so, there are productivity advantages to working alone. We are alone on board, which means there's only one person to satisfy and convince, ourselves. And we know exactly what we want. In a studio, you obviously have to go through a whole process of communication between teams so that the ideas can be properly shared. This involves meetings, email, messaging, and so on. In my case, I'm the game designer, the animator, the modeler, the programmer. It's as if the meeting room were my brain and meetings were held instantaneously. Any studio dreams. Taken individually, my productivity is far superior to that of a studio employee. Okay, while I've got you, I'd like to take 5 minutes to remind you that Silk Road Project is a game I'm developing solo and in my spare time. I'll always be grateful to anyone who gives me a helping hand, either by liking and subscribing to the channel, or by wishlisting the game on Steam using the link in the comments. And for those who decide to support me from my Patreon page, a huge thank you. Anyway, back to the subject. To achieve my ambitions, I need to find a way of increasing my productivity even further. The simple solution would be to work as much as possible with as little leisure as possible. If I did that, I wouldn't last more than 2 weeks before going into burnout. And I'd risk losing my love for game dev forever. Obviously a bad strategy. There's another way to boost productivity, and it's the one I've chosen. To automate asset creation as much as possible. Tools such as Houdini or Substance Designer allow me to procedurally create variation of models or texture according to rules I've defined myself. So, of course, it takes a lot of time beforehand. We have to build the tools that will generate all our assets, and if I'm honest, it can even be a little frustrating since we spend like 80% of the time developing tools with no visual feedback and end up seeing everything form in a coherent way in the last 20% of the time. One example, I spent the whole month developing, among other things, tools to generate rocks from simple sculpted shapes, to create grass clusters that support wind animation, or to distribute assets on the terrain in a natural way. It took a while, but now I can create new terrain environments at lightning speed. Here's how I do it. It all starts in Blender, where I quickly sculpt a blocky for my terrain. I prefer to do this by hand rather than using noise maps because that way I can control where the mountains and valleys are. In short, I have complete control over the composition of my scene. In Blender, I also create blocky shapes for large rocks because here too I want to have control over the shapes of the assets. Once I've got a few variations, I place them manually on my terrain. Not that this part of the workflow requires a bit of manual work on my part, but that's something I wanted to have to avoid having a completely procedural and computer-generated look. But now we're getting down to business. This time we open Houdini and we start the real things. I import the blocky terrain and can now start refining it by adding noise and distortion. A little bump here and there to make the terrain a bit more uneven, and some distort to create interesting shapes. The terrain is now ready to be eroded. Using Houdini's tools, I can simulate the erosion of the terrain undergone by thousands of years of rain and wind. It's always a thrill to watch the terrain transform in a matter of seconds. I can even include the rock blocky I've created in Blender in the simulation so that the terrain conforms to the rocks. Speaking of rocks, I can also use Houdini to refine and detail them, adding fracturing effects. The bonus of erosion simulation is that Houdini creates all these layers for me to use in my Unreal material. There's a debris layer, a sediment layer, a water layer, and so on. I can create those manually too, of course, like here, where I create a cliff layer isolating only the steepest slopes of my terrain. And to detail, I can scatter assets using these same layers. Why not put grass on all flat surfaces, excluding areas where debris is concentrated during erosion? And in the debris zone, I can fill in some small rocks. When it's all done, I export it all into Unreal, starting with the terrain. Houdini is smart enough to import this as a landscape into Unreal with all layers already set up as required. I assign a material that I create using texture retrieved from Quixel and that I've retouched, and voila, I already got a working landscape. All that's left is to import the assets. I start with the big rocks, which again use Quixel texture that are tiling. Then I import the detail assets, like the small rocks and the grass, and that's what I was able to create in just an hour. Note that Houdini is a smart boy, and he even configured all my props in the most optimal way. The rocks are converted into static meshes instances, and the grass is a foliage actor instance. And the best thing of all is the flexibility it gives me. If I decide afterwards that I'd like to have a big hill in the center of my map, I can always go back into Blender, modify my blocky and go back into Houdini to have my terrain regenerated. In just a few clicks, I've modified my terrain. Imagine the time it would have taken me if I had to replace all the little rocks and bits of grass by hand. That would be too much. And if I spend a little more time there, this is how far I can go. Here's the map for the game's guest house, which will serve as the central hub. I still have some areas to work on, like this part here, which represents the mountain biome, but the other two biomes are already present. The grassland area includes a shallow river and is covered in grass, while the desert zone features large dunes of glistening sand. I still have some work to do, notably on the transition between the two biomes, which at the moment looks very artificial. Although I'm not looking for realistic treatment on this map either. In fact, I'm even looking for a bit of a surrealist feel to the scene to reinforce the fantasy feeling. In addition to the mountainous regions to be finished, I also want to add a background around my landscape to give the impression that the world extends further than the gameplay area. And that's all for this month, and thank you again for your loyalty and for making it to the end of this video. Don't forget to wishlist the game on Steam if you haven't already, and see you next month for another devlog. Okay, see you, bye bye.